I am called in the night and refuse to come, this oath will kill me. If I see anyone steal white man's property, I must help him. I must hide what he gives me and say nothing, or this oath will kill me.
The whole system in this country, the economic system, is such that jobs are scarce. Automation is limiting jobs. It's decreasing jobs. And as automation eliminates the job opportunities, legislation will not create job opportunities. All it will do is bring about friction and hostility between the two races.
You see, there will be no progressive revival if black folks are not deeply involved in it.
I will obey all orders of the Mau Mau, or this oath will kill me.
Peace and greetings, friends, comrades, and enemies. My name is Pascal Robert. I am the normal host of the Mau Mau Hour, normally on the last Wednesday of the month. And just to let you know, this episode of the Mau Mau Hour will be filmed and aired on Saturday afternoon at noon, or normal Saturday time for This Is Revolution podcast, because my host Jason has a special program. He will be airing at 9 p.m. Today, we're going to be talking about a very important subject matter in the face of the global conflagration that we are seeing in the Middle East with Israel and Palestine after what has been alleged to be an attack of Hamas that caused several deaths of Israelis. The state of Israel is basically pounding the Gaza Strip and punishing them, causing thousands of deaths. And we are realizing that the desire of the Palestinians to be a liberated nation of themselves from occupation is being jeopardized in front of our own eyes with profound attack by the nation state of Israel under the leadership of Benjamin Netanyahu. In light of this particular very, very tragic and precarious situation, we have to ask a question about a phenomenon that we've talked about several times on our show here that has posed a challenge to the hegemony of the West and its ability to maintain dominance and control over the affairs of the world, meaning the United States and its NATO allies. And that phenomenon has been the rise of quote-unquote multipolarity in the BRICS, which is to be defined as the rise of the combination of China and Russia as a unitary force posing as an alternative to the geostrategic, political, and economic hegemony of the United States and its NATO allies, providing, some would say, economic, military, and other options for the global South as a new paradigm looking eastward for the solutions to the problems of the world. So in light of that phenomenon we've seen developing, where countries like Africa and even some Middle Eastern countries have been looking to Russia and China as a new sponsor of the development programs, the question we're going to be addressing on our show today is, what exactly does this phenomenon of the BRICS or multipolarity mean in the face of the current geostrategic reality we're facing in the Middle East with Israel and Palestine? In other words, are the BRICS a serious threat to Western hegemony that has always been a willing sponsor and supporter of Israel, and oftentimes its misappropriation of power to cause aggressive damage to Palestinians? Are we going to see a new type of paradigm where there will be a check on that aggression? Or will the multipolarity and BRICS be nothing but a paper tiger that will co-sign the same old oppression that we've seen in the Middle East between Israel and Palestine, and do nothing but be a new banker of record for the global South under the same old oppressive terms? To answer that question, we have two esteemed guests who, frankly, I could not imagine being better to hold this discussion. They have both been guests on our shows before. One has been a guest several times. We have professor of sociology at Florida Memorial and West Virginia State, Paul Mocombe, and we have the well-known activist, architect of many movements in the South, New African, Kali Akuno, and we're going to introduce them both to the show. Gentlemen, thank you for being on our show. Thank you for having me. And Kali, we'll remind our show what exactly the full movement that you are, Operation
Cooperation Jackson.
Cooperation Jackson, correct. I'm sorry, my mind escaped me.
No, that's all right.
Cooperation Jackson. Let me tell you, brothers, we have been conferencing back and forth via text about this subject matter, and I want to repeat, I couldn't imagine two better individuals from the radical left perspective to be having this conversation with on this subject matter. So let's start right out the gate. We all have been observing with quite sadness and probably legitimate anger at what is going on in Palestine in the wake of the so-called alleged Hamas attacks and the response, the disproportionate responses by Netanyahu and the Zionist state of Israel. We all have been students and aware of the development of the BRICS and multipolarity with the rise of China and Russia, particularly after the start of the war in Ukraine. My first question to you, and I will start with Paul first, is the BRICS and multipolarity a serious challenge to the status quo of Western hegemony in the Middle East vis-a-vis Israel and Palestine? Or are they really a paper tiger that's going to co-sign politics as usual?
Thanks for having me once again, Pascal. It's nice to see you, brother. And it's a pleasure to meet you, Kali. So thank you all, and I hope this conversation goes well. To answer your question, the whole BRICS situation, the agglomeration that we call BRICS, started when I was actually an undergrad in college. And initially it was BRIC, which was Brazil, Russia, India, and China. And it was coined by the Goldman Sachs economist Jim O'Neill in 1991. And what he saw was that those four nations by 2050 would dominate the global economy. So basically, it was within the framework of a global capitalist world system. He's doing his analysis. And if we interject the BRICS, and it would become BRICS in 2005 with the addition of South Africa. So it became Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. Within the language of Emmanuel Wallerstein's world systems, these nations were what we call semi-periphery nations. They combine agricultural raw material production as well as emerging industrial productions. And that distinguished them from periphery nations such as Haiti and others in what we call the global South, which basically invested in agricultural and raw materials for the global economy, and in the emerging post-industrial economies such as the United States and Western Europe, who were mostly finance capital, accumulating wealth through rent, what the economist Michael Hudson called rent. So in that sense, they were not perceived as a challenge to the global capitalist world system under American hegemony, because with the fall of the Soviet Union by 1991, the United States became the sole superpower, controlling the global economy through its control of the Middle East, the tying the dollar to petroleum, and its control over the ability to print money and using the American dollar as the global currency on the international scene. So initially, it was not seen as a counter-hegemonic force to the capitalist world system under American hegemony. However, if we also look at BRICS also within the language of Karl Polanyi, the Austrian anthropologist and economist, who was trying to understand fascism and the rise of fascism post the 1940s, excuse me. If we understand also the process that is taking place within the capitalist world system, as well as within the language of Karl Polanyi's counter hegemony, what Polanyi argues is that capitalism introduces forces in traditional society. And you have to understand, the BRICS nations were traditional societies that were emerging as industrial as well as industrial societies. And what Polanyi argues, as these societies emerge, capitalism introduces commodifications, which threatens the nation state. And as a result, the leaders of these nation states turn to fascism, and this fascism also has the potential, it has revolutionary potential in the sense that it seeks to protect the nation states from the vagaries of capitalist relations of production. So the introduction of three things: the commodification of money, land, and labor, basically decenters or deconstructs the traditionalism of traditional society. And that forces them, he calls this the double movement, to look inward and focus on protecting the society from the vagaries of capitalist relations. And
Can you define vagaries of capitalist relations?
The contradictions of capitalism. Because as capitalist relations are introduced into traditional societies, what emerges is you get this relations between things. This is what Marx calls commodity fetishism. So now the relations are no longer between people. People now are determined by their worth in terms of money. So hence the commodification becomes the medium by which relations are conducted in traditional societies. Whereas in traditional societies, you had relations between people. Now money becomes a factor. Also, what's introduced is the commodification of land. In traditional societies, land as a commodity is foreign. And capitalist relations of productions introduce this commodification of land. The other thing that's commodified is the person itself becomes a thing that can be sold. That's also problematic. But within that, as these processes are taking place, there's the potential for revolution or counter hegemonic movements against capitalist relations of production, because leaders will emerge who in Western society are deemed fascist or on the right, who will seek to protect the traditionalism of these societies by attacking the relations between things, by trying to reassert the traditionalism of the society. And I think it is within those two frameworks, within the capitalist world system and the responses of these nation states to the commodification of people, land, and of labor, land, and money, and the responses to the BRICS nations that will determine whether or not they're revolutionary or not. And contemporarily, I believe it is revolutionary in the sense that what we see emerging with China and Russia as the leaders who are attacking, and we have to see, yes, in America and on the right, they see Vladimir Putin, Xi Jinping as fascist. That's what we hear. Putin is a fascist. Again, within the logic of Polanyian discourse, he is assumed to be a fascist because he's trying to protect his society. Remember, in 1991, and I don't want to go on. I'll end with this. In 1991, when the Soviet Union collapsed, the Americans go in and they commodify everything. They introduce the dollar. They introduce neoliberalism, and the Russian society basically was destroyed post 1991 under Yeltsin. And then you get the emergence of Vladimir Putin, who not only, remember, the first thing he does is he attacks the oligarchy. He attacks the oligarchy and tells them straight up, hey, it's either you relinquish some of your power, or you will kill you, essentially, if you read some of Michael Hudson's account of what happened. But nonetheless, He seeks to protect Russian society from what we call the contradictions and problematics, or what Marx calls the vagaries of capitalism, by becoming a strong man, introducing traditionalism in society, allowing certain segments of the society to be marketized or financialized, and then allowing state control of other segments of the society. So in essence, it's ironic that Russia would adopt socialism with Chinese characteristics in Russian society post 1991 under Vladimir Putin, in an attempt, and is reactionary, in an attempt to protect the society from capitalism. So in a sense, it may have started off as a sort of yes, in line with the discourse of the global capitalist relations of production under American hegemony, but post Vladimir Putin, it becomes a sort of protectionism. The West will call it fascism, which attacks not only international socialism, because what the BRICS are currently doing, it attacks both the neoliberal project, and it also attacks the globalist universal project of international socialists in America and elsewhere. And
But do you think that movement, Putin and Z, is revolutionary or radical or transformative enough to challenge the status quo?
For me,
what's going on currently in between Israel and
yes,
Palestine?
for me, it is. For me, as it's currently constituted, and I mind you, I understand it's reactionary in terms of trying to protect the societies from the relations of production. But for me, it's revolutionary. It's revolutionary in this sense. It attacks, for me, the neoliberal project as these societies and these leaders try to protect their society from neoliberal policy, austerity, liberalization, market liberalization, financialization, etc., as well as it attacks the universalism of the internationalist socialist movement coming out of the West. I have a problem with the form of socialism that the international socialism that the left is producing in the West to export globally. So for me, it's revolutionary in that it's attacking the neoliberal process coming out of America in the West, and it's attacking the internationalist socialist movement coming out of the West as well, for a nationalization project. Basically, what the BRICS are pushing currently is, and I'm a nationalist, of course, being of Haitian descent, is a nationalist project in which the emphasis is on trade amongst the currencies of these nation states, as well as international cooperation among nation states. So it's basically a return back to the early 1900s, before World War I, without colonialism. So I do see that as revolutionary.
Okay, I'm going to let Kali jump in because I got my own issues with what you're talking about, brother. So, Kali, I'm going to ask you the question and repeat it, and you can, attack what not attack, but address what brother Mocombe said here. Do you believe that the current manifestation of multipolarity, i.e. BRICS, is radical, transformative, revolutionary enough to challenge the status quo politics that we're seeing right now in the Middle East vis-a-vis Israel, Palestine? Or are we basically seeing nothing but a paper tiger with a new banker for the global South and the Middle East?
I would argue neither, in truth.
Oh, okay.
Look, some brass tacks. Far as I could tell and listen and heard as of today, the Zionist project killed over 600 people today. Now that's what they can count. That doesn't mean or doesn't include, as far as I know, how many people who will die within the next 24 to 48 hours as the electricity runs out because the gas stores run out. Now, they killed 700 people the day before. They've gone through 4 iterations of trying to create some form of resolution, calling for either a humanitarian corridor on the light end or a ceasefire, kind of your middle end. The United States, it is full on with the elimination of Gaza. I mean, the elimination of Hamas, right? And they are going to accept nothing less. And they've given, the garrison state of Israel, to this point, at least rhetorically, carte blanche to do whatever they want. Now, they've delayed the ground invasion, right? And Israel is chomping at the bit to go in, by all indications. And it's the United States which has said hold off. And the reason fundamentally that they said hold off, by their own admission, according to the Wall Street Journal today, is that they've been waiting to put in all of the equipment that they need, the military equipment that they need to be able to defend the Zionist project from further incursions from Iran, from Hezbollah, from Syria, from Houthi forces, assumably in Yemen. And I'm just citing forces for the most part who, even though it hasn't been reported in the United States media, most of the Western media, there has been a larger escalation or enjoyment of the struggle by different forces. Has Hezbollah utilized all of their forces yet? No. Has Iran deployed all of their resources yet? No, they have not, right? But there is more going on than they are telling folks in the most part in the Western media in terms of a response. But here's the thing. Iran just joined BRICS about 2 months ago, right? And just got into a little introductory kind of engagement in it, if that. The other piece that we need to talk about that I'm saying, that needs to be addressed is the counter moves that the U.S. was already making to BRICS, even before this particular war jumped off. So I want everybody to go back. So the BRICS summit happened in South Africa, right, in Tanzania, in August. In September, the United States, as the chief architect of the G20, the group of 20 nations, right, which is technically the most industrialized countries of the world, when in fact it's just basically the global financiers at this point, since most of the global production is actually in the global south, in truth. But we'll come to that later. But they called for and set up memorandums at the G20 for a corridor which includes India, the Middle, and Europe. And this is their response to two things. Number one, the BRICS. Number two, and probably even much more fundamentally, right, the so-called Silk Road, right, the Silken Belt Road that China has been constructing, which is a sloppy, they're projecting it as if it's this well thought out, all thought out plan, and that's not how it's rolled out. It's not how it could roll out, given all of the complexities of how the Chinese got to negotiate with every single nation state regime about being able to build infrastructure in their particular land base, right? So it's going to have twists and turns in it. It's not going to be as uniform as people want to make it out to be. Particularly, I know there's a bunch of Africans that are hoping that it's going to create more infrastructure than they've ever been able to down in the last 100-something years. Now, that being said, this countermeasure to BRICS was already set up. And the United States had already dedicated, through its main partner, India, had already dedicated more money to the construction of this project than BRICS has ever been able to amass in its 15-year period. So the inequity in terms of the level of financial resources these projects have to kind of bring to bear to anything is still real, right? But relative to this situation, look, the Russians have been using their veto, I think, very effectively relative to this situation. Now, what do I mean by that? The Russians have been very clear that they are going to protect the right of the Palestinian people to engage in acts of liberation. Hear me clearly on that, right? Because what the United Forces is an unconditional surrender. even worse than what the Palestinians were basically forced into when they signed the Oslo Accords in the mid-1990s. And they're on every TV channel anybody would want, saying, like, we have the right to determine the leadership of the Palestinian people. That's what this whole thing that we're going to eliminate Hamas is all about. But relative to your question, we got to ask ourselves, all right, outside of Russia, right, and the Security Council offering kind of a paltry defense, where's China? Right? They haven't shown up and played much in the by way of offering a deterrent yet. India is
May I interject real
pro-Israel.
quick, Kali?
Go
May I
ahead.
interject? The
Go ahead.
Chinese did send, to counter the Americans, they did send 6 warships to the Middle East to counter the Americans. Just like the Russians also sent their Kinzhal missiles into the Middle East as well to counter the American movement, sending 2 warships. So for the first time, the Chinese are responding on a military
Have they arrived
basis.
yet? Have they arrived yet?
I believe they have. I believe they
Okay.
arrived yesterday or
I'm gonna
today.
have to follow up on that because
Yeah,
I know I've
yeah,
been in
Go
some
ahead, brother.
debates.
They
I'm
sent
glad you put
6.
that up because I've been in some
Yeah,
debates
6.
wondering if it's rhetoric or is it substance.
No, they sent 6. They sent
Okay.
6. The New York
Listen,
Times reported it too.
I need to pause this because we need to do a recap. There's been some very important facts that were laid on the table here.
Yeah.
First of all, Kali, you made it very clear that there was a countermeasure that the United States and its NATO allies had to the BRICS before the BRICS summit in South Africa.
Not to the
After.
BRICS.
No, it was
Not
after.
to the BRICS, to the
Last-
Chinese, not to the BRICS, to the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative.
Okay, I'm
They
glad you corrected me.
pledged, I believe, what is it, $600 billion they
600
pledged?
billion off the top.
They,
Yeah.
but they
Okay,
made the pledge, but the money hasn't been released. This was a countermeasure to.
I'm glad
Belt
you
and
corrected
Road.
me. I'm glad
Yes.
you corrected me.
And Pascal, that was in September. Now they had the whole thing about all these summits is they've done the work before they get to the summits. Everybody should know that. Right?
Okay.
The summits are just announcement photo opportunities. But it was.
And remember,
it's
Joe Biden
countermeasures.
ran on that initiative. Joe Biden ran on that initiative.
Right.
The
as a
initiative
pledge. to pledge that money to counter the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative.
Yeah.
Okay. So in order to counter the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative, can either one of you define the Belt and Road Initiative for our audience?
You want to? We can both take a little stab. Go ahead, brother.
Go ahead. Well, the Chinese, part of it is to secure their trade routes. Remember, the Chinese are heavily dependent on natural resources, gas and energy from the Middle East to power their industrial production. So, and also they hold, I believe, 40% of the American reserve currency. And what they did was, instead of investing in U.S. bonds, etc., they use now the reserve currency because the Chinese save so much. They use the reserve currency to go around and build infrastructure project in the third world, in the Middle East, and it's a land corridor to export, to trade with Middle Eastern countries as well as African countries. And these infrastructure projects are in place, and it's a win-win. It benefits the Chinese in terms of no longer focusing on a sea route to import gas and other natural resources. Now they have a secure land route throughout Southeast Asia, Eastern Europe, Africa, even in the Western Hemisphere. And now it's problematic for the United States because now the money that the Chinese, remember, in the 1980s and 90s, the same process occurred with the Japanese. The Japanese, because they had a trade imbalance with the U.S., they were forced to go invest in U.S. government bonds and real estate here in the U.S. Well, the Chinese, in response, whereas the Japanese did that, the Chinese said, no, we'll use that money because they realized America is just printing money. So it didn't make sense to hold on to this reserve. So they invested the reserve and they called it the Belt and Road Initiative. And it's a win-win for all the countries involved. So, but it's an attack. It threatens the United States, because the United States now, the investment that should be coming in terms of the Chinese purchasing government bonds, investing in the real estate market here in the U.S., now is being invested in countries in the third world, the Middle East, and other areas in Eastern Europe. So that's the problem for the United States.
How do you want to jump in?
Yeah, there's another piece to it.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to add, which is the military geopolitical dimension of this, right? And if you just look at it from the old game, right now, what the United States has military superiority over is on sea, is by sea, right? But I'm gonna go back. You played some Mocombe. I'm gonna bring that up. The U.S. ain't one on the ground nowhere, right? Back in World War II, and right. So they understand.
The U.S. is not one on the ground anywhere.
Yeah, they don't. And all we got to do is look at Afghanistan as evidence for that, right? They spent
Iraq,
20
Iraq,
years.
Syria. Yep.
Yeah, but I mean, the most embarrassing one they've had in recent memory is Afghanistan. They spent 20 years, billions of dollars, left them with a modern army. Right now, they're gonna have trouble, re-equipping it from time to time. But they spent 20 years to take out the Taliban, only to put the Taliban right back, right, to leave all that in power. So they don't want a particular piece. So part of this is also Chinese thinking of, you might control all these military bases on the periphery of everything, but Central Asia, you ain't got that.
Not
right?
yet.
Well, I don't think they're gonna get it, but that's another question. But going back to this piece around this particular moment being kind of a test of the BRICS, I don't think it's really totally fair to make a strategic assessment yet on the basis of this moment, is where I was headed, right? China plays the long game, y'all, right? They don't get into immediate conflicts, right? They thinking 50 to 100 years out. They got the political consolidation to be, at this point in the game anyway, to be able to do that. Now, that doesn't mean that they don't have blocks and tendencies and conflicts amongst themselves. They have plenty of that, right? But they're united enough in terms of their grand project that they can pretty much stay consolidated around the main objectives and missions. And one of the things that they've been trying to do is forestall the inevitable conflict they see happening between themselves and the United States. And the expansion of BRICS, I would argue, what just happened when they brought on Iran, when they brought on, was it Iran, the UAE, right?
Saudi Arabia.
And Saudi Arabia.
They brought 6 new nations.
Yeah, we're going to take a couple of your key friends who have been drifting from you and seeing, how the winds of change are happening, beginning to assert more of their independence. And we're going to bring our overall strategic numbers, particularly us in India, we're going to bring that to bear and mix that with OPEC. That's basically the decision that they just made, right? So it's the original BRIC with OPEC. South Africa somewhat just kind of go along for the ride and adding on some political flavor, right? And it was their push, I think, in particular, to get Egypt and Ethiopia on, right? But them trying to go headlong, toe-to-toe with the United States relative to Israel right now, they're not going to do that. And this is where you see, I'm talking about the Chinese, to be clear. This is where you see some of the fractures, taking place. And where I was going earlier, the biggest thing that's always been a concern for me about how BRICS has been constructed is India under Modi, right? So Modi is a Zionist, right? On the basis of being extremely Islamophobic.
Good point.
Like he has his project is to basically rid Indian society and the Indian state from any influence coming from those particular forces. Part of it being historic, right? With the before the British came in, India was dominated by Muslims. So folks have, if you're not aware about that, the Mughals, so there's a long-standing beef if you want to call it, put it in layman's terms, between the Hindus and the Muslims relative to this, which you understand, anybody wants to go back to look at the history, that's part of what the partition of what became Pakistan and Bangladesh, that's basically what that's about. He's just reviving
getting Muslims out of India,
right? Just get them out. So if you look at how this is planned,
may I interject real quick, brother?
Real quick, brother.
Oh, go ahead.
Because the main point is to recognize, as it relates to the UN General Assembly and when their influence, I'm talking about India, their influence within the in the Security Council, they are taking the position closest to the West, right, and backing Israel and trying to do this particular purge of Hamas. So the core countries of BRICS, you got India on one side siding with the West, and you got Russia and China on the other side siding with the Palestinians. So there's some core operational unity that they are not yet working in lockstep on all issues relative to their own respective interests at this point, that they can't operate as a consolidated bloc just yet relative to the West and its interests.
Do you think the Indians intentionally are trying to play one side against the other?
Everybody's trying to play one side against the other.
It's geopolitics.
Yeah.
And particularly,
real quick, Pascal, we should not look at this as the West versus the BRICS. The emphasis is the West against three nations: Russia, Iran, and China. That's their concern. So if you look at Joe Biden's declaration, his request for $107 billion, $60 billion to go to Ukraine to continue the proxy war against Russia, $40 billion to go to Israel, and I'm gonna be a little cynical. I do believe the Hamas attack was a red herring. It was a red flag. They wanted to get there to start a global crisis in the Middle East to attack Iran and Hezbollah. That's my position.
When you have a leader,
go ahead, brother. What were you saying?
When you have Netanyahu, who literally, if he doesn't stay prime minister, he might be going to jail. He literally,
and then the Egyptians, even the New York Times wrote that the Egyptians warned the Israelis
told them what was up.
What
Egyptians told them what. No, I'm just echoing what you said. The Egyptians told them what was up.
And then $7 billion to go to Taiwan, which is a province of China. So basically, they're trying to prevent they're trying to go after these three nations: Iran, Russia, and China. They're losing the proxy war against the Russians. It's practically over. You don't hear anything about Ukraine in the media anymore, brother. So now, for me, this was a red flag. This was just, they knew it was coming. This was an opportunity to launch this attack. And now what's happening? Now, because we've lacked our diplomatic abilities since World War II, the Russians and the Brazilians are actually moving diplomatically in the UN. Initially, the Russians proposed a ceasefire in the Security Council, which of course the Americans rejected. And then the Brazilians picked up on that same proposal, and they also were rejected. So this is the hesitation. I agree with Khalid in the sense that the Americans are just basically stalling to get as much equipment as they can in the Middle East. But for me, brother, they're going to war. It's inevitable.
Well, let me tell you,
and we must not look. Remember, the BRICS nation was actually a capitalist a creation. It benefit them. Brazil is not a threat to the United States. India technically is not a threat to the United States. The concern is Russia, China, and Iran. If those three countries control not only the Middle East, and as Vladimir Putin said, once Africa wakes up, and Africa is waking up, and these three countries, under the leadership of these three countries, control Africa, the Middle East, and Eastern Europe. And now that you've partnered with OPEC, and now you're getting trade of oil in the currency of these countries, your basic America is in trouble, and they know it, brother. So the only way out of this is to go to war, brother. That's the only way out.
You know, it's really interesting because I had a conversation with a friend of mine today that echoes everything you said. Number one, I said that I thoroughly believe that the Hamas attack was basically a red herring in
Yeah.
that Netanyahu was warned beforehand by the Egyptians that an attack was coming. And if you know anything about the military infrastructure of the Israeli Iron Dome and the IDF, those things are designed not to fail. They cannot fail. Okay. In order for Hamas to have been able to pull off what it did, it literally would have required someone in the Israeli military apparatus to tell them to stand down. All right. There's no way that level of sophisticated military activity causing that much of a loss to Israel would have happened without some type of internal awareness of the Israeli military. So I completely agree with both of you that Netanyahu knew for a fact that this was going to happen. And someone asked, why would Netanyahu, hold on, let me make my point. Why would Netanyahu allow his own people to be sacrificed? I said, well, first of all, if you know anything about geopolitics, there's never a time in history when a leader was not willing to sacrifice some of his own people to protect the hegemonic role of his nation state. Number two, if you also understand the situation with Netanyahu is a man who, but for the fact that he won the last prime ministerial election, he would possibly be in prison right now. He's under indictment for massive corruption allegations in the state of Israel. He was profoundly unpopular, and he realizes that he had to tie his fortune to some kind of reality that put the existential feeling of not only Israelis, but Jews globally in a field that they have to trust him to avenge their lives. And this Hamas situation provided the perfect opportunity for him to do that, create a global geostrategic conflagration in the Middle East that gives the United States and NATO the pretext necessary to fish in Russia, China, and Iran to bring in the global conflagration against China and Russia that we all know the West have been dying for since earlier in the aughts.
And then Erdogan just came out and gave a speech today and says, hey, you know, stand down or we're going to war. He basically agreed. And remember, the leader of the
Erdogan
UN,
is, brothers. You just introduced him.
Erdogan of Turkey. Sorry,
Erdogan is the leader of Turkey.
The leader of Turkey, and remember, right now the Israeli state and Nikki Haley and all of these neocons, they're upset with the UN because the brother, what's his name, the leader who came out and said, hey, we need a ceasefire, and basically Israel is committing war crimes in the Gaza Strip, and now they're asking him to resign. Erdogan came out and said, hey, this is an attack on the citizens of the Gaza Strip, and it's either a ceasefire or what the Americans and the Israelis and the crazy Western Europeans undermine is the sensibility now, the Palestinian, the global sensibility that people are feeling towards the Palestinian people. I think this is part of, and I understand the geostrategy behind the Americans trying to get as much arms in there as possible, but also I don't believe they expected that there would be such empathy for the Palestinian people that we're witnessing now, brother. Not only in the Middle East, but throughout the global South, throughout the world.
I want to make an announcement on that. I think we can all empathize because we're all Generation X kind of guys here. Is that I made a statement to a friend I was talking about today. I said, listen, there's an element to what's going on right now in the Middle East that gave me a sense of optimism. He's like, what could possibly give you optimism? I said, bro, I'm old enough to remember when there was no challenge in American public consciousness to any type of Zionist Israeli aggression, and that Israel had carte blanche to do whatever it wanted to do.
I'm gonna take it a little bit further, Pascal, brother Mocombe. Look, let's not act like I hate that term, the Arab Spring, but I'm gonna use it because folks don't. That was a little bit more than a decade ago, and it did not end in the way that the masses wanted it to end.
That's true.
Some of them suffered some resounding defeats. Egypt perhaps being the most resounding of them all, right? In terms of how that played out, how a bunch of revolutionary forces were hunted down, the level of state repression that's going on, right? But that muscle memory is still there. And the folks who were kind of in the leadership of that, at least on the street, they're now in their 30s, right? And in their 40s. So they're entering into a period of political maturity. And they've learned some lessons from their defeats. The best of them, always will. So from the jump, I've been both, the little things I've been able to say and put out, been pissed to a certain extent with the response of the Arab and Islamic states within the region. But the response on the street, right, from Morocco to Pakistan and every place in between, has been pretty astounding. And you best believe when Blinken went to Qatar, right, when he made that trip, they played nice, in front of the cameras. But you best believe that the folks from Qatar told him, look, y'all better understand what forces you are potentially unleashing. Because if you keep going on this, some of us ain't going to be here to negotiate with you.
Well, let me tell you something.
All people going to take us out.
Well, let me tell you, I want to say, as someone who is...
But do we all agree that the Arab Spring was a State Department initiative, right? We all agree on that, right?
I don't know if I would say that. I think
nah, brother. The evidence is out.
It depends on where, and it depends on how.
Arab Spring was not one unitary action, all the same.
No.
Yeah.
What the Arab Spring was... What the Arab Spring in Tunisia is not what the Arab Spring was in Egypt, is not what the Arab Spring was in Morocco, is not what so to simply make it seem like it was all, a color revolution, come on, get serious, I think is very reductionist. However, I will agree that Daesh, ISIS, and whatever was the counter-revolutionary measure that neutralized the Arab Spring in the Muslim world completely. In terms and the rise of Sisi and all of those other counter-revolutionary measures as well, and the rise of these financed jihadist forces really put that to bed completely.
But the thing was, it was a setup in part for this.
Yes,
that's the piece that we need to have a deeper conversation about. Today we're gonna run out of time.
Yeah.
But it was a setup for this, because look, let's remember. They talking about there was no provocation. Go back. I want everybody in your audience to go back and look at what Netanyahu did in September when he came to New York for the United Nations annual peace. The map and everything that he put up in the justification, he's done that before, but the language he used this time particularly was telegraphic in saying there is no Palestine anywhere on this map, and there won't be. And the critical piece that was also part of the setup, a part of the reason why I think the Hamas and its allied forces, we need to be critical, because it wasn't just Hamas in this. Let's not repeat kind of what the West is saying on that. That's another piece to come back to. But part of the thing that they had to stop was the normalization of relations with all these Arab regimes.
Yes, absolutely.
They had to stop
absolutely.
They had to stop that.
And we have to give the Chinese credit for negotiating this peace, the rapprochement between the Iranians and the Saudis. We have to give them credit. And also, does your audience realize that Hamas started off as a creation of the Israeli state? Right. Yeah, the Israeli state to counter the PLO.
I think it's a little bit more complicated.
Yeah, absolutely.
The Hamas is a growth of the Muslim Brotherhood.
Yeah,
however, it was given succor and was buttressed by the Israeli state literally to be a countermeasure against Fatah and the PLO and Yasser Arafat's delegation, because they wanted to delegitimize the PLO and Fatah and actually use a bet in war to create casus belli or reason for aggression to allow them to have pretext to always go to war,
attack. Absolutely, brother.
You know?
Absolutely.
So, just real quick, because the piece that was going on this about the pretext, we need to make sure the audience knows this region has been in continuous war since 2001. It's been bled dry. And despite Iran being able to hold its forces at bay in the serious countermeasures that the United States unleashed upon it, right, when it invaded Iraq, it's not the same position it once was.
No.
And I want everybody to go back and listen. John Kirby yesterday, right? And John Kirby is an old military general who's now acting as a spokesperson for the Biden administration. He told the world, and I want us to extrapolate. He told the world, we ain't with no ceasefire, because the ceasefire will only aid Hamas. Now extend that thinking, right? You putting all this heavy equipment, you setting everything up for perfect conditions because you want a war. You want to pull Iran in on a certain level. You want to put Hezbollah on a certain level. And then let's listen to what, for those of you who can have some access to what Hezbollah and Iran are actually saying. Some of Hezbollah's leaders have already said this is existential for us. Understanding the nature of the time. If they get rid of Gaza, if they get rid of Hamas, they coming for us. So for us,
and we also have to remember
it's
2006. Remember, Hezbollah gave Israel an ass kicking in 2006.
Right.
Well, there's an element as someone who's been a practicing Muslim for over 25 years. There's an 800-pound gorilla in the room about this with the Muslim world. Palestine, Israel, and this conflict is an eschatological crisis point of fixation for not only Jews and Christians, but for Muslims as well.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
The battle of Israel and Palestine is literally a part of the faith mechanism of end times narratives of not just Jews and not just Christians, for Muslims as well.
Yes.
Okay?
Absolutely.
So people don't understand that one of the reasons why this is such a visceral reality for the Muslim world is that in the mind of very serious practicing Orthodox Muslim, this is the time of the war of the last days.
Yeah.
And that's what Erdogan, if you listen to his speech.
Yeah, that's what he said.
Part of what he brought up.
That's exactly what he was saying. And also remember, in Russia and China's response to this is not eschatological, it's geostrategic. Remember, it is Russia is going in to protect Syria and Iran, and China is going in to protect its
you know how much oil China gets from Iran?
Yeah. Exactly, brother.
China gets something like 500,000 barrels, like a
absolutely
from Iran.
So this is dangerous, brother. And what saddens me, Pascal, is the fact that I don't believe the masses of the American people truly understand where we are historically, brother. These neocons, they're not backing down, brother. The entire world is calling for a ceasefire except the Americans and their NATO allies. That's it. Everybody else.
Even their NATO allies is getting a little weak.
Yeah, until France today, Macron came out and said, nah, there won't be any ceasefire. After he said yesterday there would be a ceasefire, but this is people have to wake up, and we have to hold this government accountable, because this is getting dangerous, brother. And I don't believe in the Russians today. They tested their nuclear weapons, and they're not backing down.
So we lost.
They're not backing down.
No, I did not know that the Russians tested their nuclear weapons today.
Oh yeah, no,
brother.
Everybody's hyping it up because I think they understand the tenor of the times and the way that it's not really being presented here.
Yeah.
And the piece that I was going about with John Kirby, I was saying extend that analysis. Like part of the thing is they want to have this now because it's like we're not going to give China a whole bunch of time to get prepared.
Yeah.
I'm gonna, but either, and the logic is, let's be real, and I'm gonna just break it down on some simple terms. The logic among these white folks is either we gonna have it or nobody will.
Nobody. A very close friend of mine.
And that's the name of the game right now. They've been setting everything up. If you look at some of the stuff them talking about, they're gonna bring industrial production back. They've been the whole pivot towards Asia. Let's not act like this piece that Brother Mocombe brought up. They had a name for that during the Bush administration. Y'all remember what the axis of evil was?
Yeah, right. Absolutely.
That was Russia, Iran, and China. So it's not like this is a new particular game. It's just a new play out of this.
No, this is Samuel Huntington's Clash of Civilization. These people have been mapping this out since I was in undergrad. I had to read all of this garbage in grad school. Clash of Civilization, the end of history, all of this foolishness. And at that point, BRICS wasn't an issue. Now, the minute Russia under Vladimir Putin decided, you know what, we're tired of the golden billion. We're tired of the golden billion. America cannot dictate. And now they didn't realize the ass kicking they're getting in Ukraine, they can't sustain that. So now this is the only opportunity they have. If they lose in Ukraine and then you turn around and you get defeated, Israel gets defeated by Hezbollah and Iran, that's the end of Western hegemony. We have to look at America as a continuation of the British colonial project. Yeah. It is an imperial project that threatens humanity at this point. These white folks they're looking to go to war.
There's an 800-pound gorilla in the room that I want to share with you guys that you might not know. Biden sold off nearly half of the U.S. oil reserve. Is it ready for crisis? I don't know, guys. You guys know this. Do you know that the United States oil reserves are the lowest it's been since the early 80s,
brother?
Why?
And remember, Pascal, this was aimed to threaten the Russian oil production. Remember, this was put in place as sanctions against Russia, so that the Americans started to tap into their oil reserve. You know what I'm saying?
Not only that, they were selling off oil that they were taking from the reserve to finance the economy when the crash after COVID.
Absolutely, brother.
And now they're all so low. They're literally, the article in Politico that I was just reading off was saying that the worst thing that could happen is if Iran joins this conflict, because as we know, if Iran closes the Strait of Hormuz, that means, over. And the United States cannot produce oil for itself, there's no oil going to the West. That's a wrap. Particularly when, as we mentioned, Iran
this is
and
why,
Saudi.
I mean, this is why it's something to end on. One of the critical pieces that so far, the U.S. has been able to forestall, but they ain't gonna be able to do it for long, right? Immediately, some of the most strategic minds that I know of that way, right, over in Southwest Asia, they were saying we need to just call for an oil embargo and end this damn thing.
Wow.
Now that's gonna come. That noise is not gonna be able to be withstood, and I think particularly something like the Emirates, Qatar, Bahrain, and even the Saudis going to have to come to some conclusion, right? The piece I was saying about the forces of the Arab Spring, because look, there's already been chants. I've heard chants in Tunisia, I've heard chants in Morocco, of all places, Algeria, and in Egypt. That one of the key things that's been coming up in some of these demonstrations, right, is the chant of when is the army going to get involved? Meaning our army, right? When are we going to send our soldiers on? They ain't going to be able, these Arab regimes, and they are not going, they're going to have to choose either we're going to remain a puppet or we're going to have to go with the mass sentiment of our own people. Otherwise, our people are going to show us the door.
Yeah.
So they're going to have to make some moves like, yeah, we're going to have to recall the ambassador to Israel. cease relationships, cut off an oil embargo. And if you look at where the U.S. now, it's in a very strategically weak place, right? And then one of the things I remember you had some time ago, how well, to me, in my mind, Putin played some of the aspects of that war, of how many dollars he held in reserve,
Yeah.
right? How much oil and stuff he had set up in preparation over the years, knowing that the West was going to keep pressing the buttons of the Russian state, right,
through
to get what they
Ukraine.
want, right? And so it's the other thing. Ukraine didn't. They keep popping like, oh, this just popped up out of nowhere.
No, this is since 2006, brother.
A long,
since 2006.
Like that had been played. That had got set up when they made the negotiation to basically dismantle the Soviet Union.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Gentlemen, we are at an hour. I would love to keep this going. We got to invite you both back because this has been so rich. Thank you for coming on. This is Revolution, the Mau Mau Hour. Professor Dr. Paul Mocombe and Kali Akuno of Cooperation Jackson. We will have you back to talk about these affairs again. This is Revolution, the Mau Mau Hour. We are out.
If I tell any secrets of the Mau Mau, this oath will kill me. If I am called in the night and refuse to come, this oath will kill me. If I see anyone steal white man's property, I must help him. I must hide what he gives me and say nothing, or this oath will kill me.
The whole system in this country, the economic system, is such that jobs are scarce. Automation is limiting jobs. It's decreasing jobs. And as automation eliminates the job opportunities, legislation will not create job opportunities. All it will do is bring about friction and hostility between the two races.
You see, there will be no progressive revival if black folks are not deeply involved in it.
I will obey all orders of the Mau Mau, or this oath will kill me.